All right. Well, welcome. This is episode 4 of Unlocking the Miracles Within. I'm here with a, an amazing human being, but also a friend of mine, Dawson Church. We're going to be discussing meditation and tuning into the divine frequency. And why this is so important to me is because after I had my big opening, as I shared with you in episode 1, meditation was the first thing that brought me back to earth and grounded me and got me to an important place around discernment and allowing me to discern what was good for me and what wasn't. And I couldn't think of a better person in the world. That's why I asked Dawson to join us for the show, because he is this amazing blend of spirituality, but also science. He has this brilliant mind to put research and science behind the unexplainable, the mysteries, as I would say. Dawson has authored some. He's actually my brother, my youngest brother's favorite author. He's written some amazing books. Genie in Your Genes has been out for a while now. I don't have the year, Dawson, but that's a great book. Mind Over Matter, Bliss Brain. His latest one is awesome. I urge you to check it out. It's called Spiritual Intelligence. And all these books have different approaches to them, but they're basically bringing the research and the science behind the heart of connecting to the divine. However you express that in your world and in your life, you know me, I express it as God and Jesus and those things. But however you express it, it's about connecting to your highest purpose and your highest self. So I want to welcome the amazing Dawson Church here with us. And I know I have a side-by-side Dawson, so don't make any funny faces at me, when we're during the show. Anyway, welcome, Dawson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, Jeffrey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So where I wanted to start, and for those of you that are interested in any of Dawson's stuff as we go through the show, he has an amazing website, EFTuniverse.com. He's the founder and creator of EFT Universe. I'll also have all the links to his books, his bio, his website uh, within the podcast. So if you just kind of go below the video, if you're on YouTube, or you go below the podcast in the description, you'll see all those links. Just click on that and check him out. I'm sure you'll enjoy the experience with him today. Dawson, you and I've had many, many chats over the years, but I never really sat down and I don't want to say go back to the beginning, but maybe you can tell us the story of how you got into meditation and tapping into this divine presence.
Yeah, I got into it in the way that many people in the personal growth world and the therapy and coaching world get into it, by looking for solutions to my own deep unhappiness. And I was just miserably unhappy when I was a child and a teenager. And recent research has shown that spirituality and depression are two sides of the same coin. That research into teens, for example, shows that those who have high levels of depression have low levels of spirituality, and those that have high levels of spirituality, they may go through depressive episodes, as common in teenagers, but they actually bounce back really quickly. So the two things are actually in inverse proportion. And I was just one of those teenagers who was so desperately unhappy, suicidal, miserable, disconnected. I just wanted to not be on the planet. And I eventually joined an ashram, went and lived communally at the age of 15 and grew organic vegetables, learned to meditate, learned energy healing. And I observed that a lot of the dysfunctionality I'd seen earlier in my life in the Christian church was also right there in Eastern religions and philosophies, and that there seemed to be no place where all of these basic failings of human nature weren't present. So I then moved into psychology and I studied psychology, and I thought, well, the study of the mind might rescue me and people from this deep unhappiness. And it did. It did have some merit to it. And then much later, I discovered energy psychology. And I also, right at that same time, began to meditate daily. I'd been an occasional meditator, but in 2000, I said, I was in real crisis again in my 40s, and I said, I'm going to meditate every single day. And I did, and that was the pivot point. That daily meditation made a difference. And then I began to do EFT tapping, got into energy medicine more deeply, and all kinds of things began to shift that psychology had never been able to shift. And so energy therapies are incredibly powerful. They're not a panacea, they're not all you need, but when you start to approach your problems as energy problems, not as material problems, and you start to work on them energetically, all kinds of things can shift materially. And that shifted for me. And a byproduct was happiness. I'd been, gotten more content over the years, but I found myself after a while of consistent meditation to be having happiness independent of circumstances. And that was very powerful. Whatever was going on in the world, in my own body, in my own mind, in my own finances, my relationships, I had this inner core of stable happiness. And Sanskrit even has a word for that. They say that average happiness, what we call happiness or joy in the Western world, they call sukha. But then they have another level called preya, and preya is sustained happiness. And so I was in that state of sustained happiness, and that was wonderful. So it was that got me into it. It was basically that deficit that drove me to find the answers.
Mm.
And of course, when you find answers, you then want to tell the world, hey, you don't have to suffer. So I've been doing that ever since.
So yeah, that's incredible, man. That's a quite a journey and a long journey, right? I mean, so young. God, you're so blessed for tapping into that so young. So a lot of the terminology used in your books and in the world is calling it the divine frequency. So, in your words, because I think it sometimes feels different, means different to different people. In your words, what does that mean to you?
Frequency is a incredibly valuable concept. And one of the ways to apply it is that if two things have the same frequency, they resonate with each other. And so we probably had the experience of you're holding a guitar or a violin or a ukulele, and someone else plays a few notes across the room on a different instrument, and your instrument is resonating even though you aren't playing it. So a drum will resonate, and resonance is found all over the place, down to the level of our cells. In that first book, The Genie in Your Genes, I talked about the science of resonance as it applied to very tiny structures in our cells called microtubules. And they're the girders. They're like the scaffolding. If you think of a cell as a building, these would be the girders, the beams, the joists, and all of the structure that holds it up. That's your microtubules in your cells. And the research has shown over the last couple of decades that these are resonant structures. They're resonating, but with what? And it turns out they are able to resonate with all kinds of things. One thing, they can resonate with each other. So our cells can communicate extremely quickly, instantaneously, the speed of sound, um, by the principle of resonance. And then we resonate with various other things. And so if you go and, for example, I used to be a member of a car club. And so those people in the British car club resonated with each other around
Mm-hmm.
British cars.
Yeah.
And so you want to see what you're resonant with. Probably their family members you're resonant with, both in a dissonant and a consonant way. And so what do you resonate with? And what meditation tends to do is it tends to raise your level of frequency. So you start to resonate with different things. And in my book, Spiritual Intelligence, I show that we have structures in our brain, discrete, measured structures that neuroscience has tracked and identified that allow us to literally resonate, that allow our individual consciousness to resonate with the consciousness of the universe, with universal consciousness. And so now, what we have the opportunity to do is doing high vibration things like reading spiritual books, hanging
Mm-hmm.
out with elevated people, abstaining from things that drag us down that vibrational ladder. In spiritual intelligence, I liken the process of meditation to a ladder. And what makes for the best meditation practice isn't the hour of meditation. it's the 23 hours in between. If you're falling down the vibrational ladder in those 23 hours, you have to laboriously start climbing your way up again in the next morning's meditation. But if you stay high on that level all of those 23 hours, you start at a high level and then you move up into a higher frequency. And as people move into these higher frequencies, as they have this resonance, as they cultivate an inner state that is resonant with cosmic consciousness, the first, and a whole bunch of things happen. One thing that's common, regardless of the spiritual path, is joy. People have dramatically high levels of joy. So you no longer have just sukha or praya, happiness or sustained happiness. You start to hit a state called vishoka. And there is not even a word in the English language to describe
Mm.
vishoka. The best translation we have for it is sorrowless joy, joy without a trace of sorrow in it. And that's a state that these elevated places like the meditative experience will put you into. So now you're resonating with that frequency, and then it just goes up from there. There's also the state of Ananda, and in Ananda, even higher than Vishoka, that's unqualified ecstasy. And you start to know this and reach these other levels of joy during meditation. So now you're resonating at a much, much higher frequency. And once you start to do that, then your ability to resonate with that frequency becomes easier, and you access levels of consciousness you can't access at those lower frequencies. So that's the process of spiritual growth. We have these four circuits in our brain that allow us to connect with infinite consciousness. I describe those in the first chapter of spiritual intelligence, and then go on in the second chapter to show that certain kinds of meditation and spiritual practice actually grow all four circuits, like working out in the gym, your muscles get bigger, those four circuits get larger. And again, in depressed people, those four circuits are not turned on, and some of them start to shrink. In
Mm.
people who are cultivating spiritual intelligence, those four circuits start to grow, making it easier and easier and easier to reach those elevated states. Also, it affects your body. Your telomeres begin to lengthen, and those are the little end caps on your chromosomes that predispose you to long life. So, very well researched, and the link between meditation and telomere length actually won its discoverer the Nobel Prize. So this is all very conventional science that your neurotransmitters, your enzymes, all of the cellular chemicals begin to change as you reach these elevated states. Your body begins to change, and eventually that affects your lifespan. So all of these things are a consequence of moving yourself into these elevated frequencies. Joy, physical changes, inner peace, equanimity, and resilience. Resilience improves dramatically. So even though there's all the chaos going on around you, or in the world, or in the news, or in your body, or in the financial world, or wherever it might be, you have this inner core of unshakable resilience, which is able to carry you through life's challenges. And so these states, like the divine frequency, aren't just elevated states spiritually, they translate into a very different material life for people who are practicing them as well.
Yes, you were as you were talking, and of course imparting your brilliance and all the science and all that. I got on thinking of a few things. One was the never ceasing prayer that they talk about in the Bible, which is you were talking about the 23 hours, the other 23 hours in the day, and where because I equate prayer to meditation, or they connect to each other in many different ways. But it's going throughout your day where it's not like you have to sit down and have a focused prayer. It's a constant breath, a constant praying, a constant connection in my terminology, God. So that's the first thing that came in my mind. And then I'm such a practical guy, right? So the other thing is, a lot of times when I hit the higher frequency in me, it shows up as bubbles. Like I feel like my body is lighter and I'm expanded and I'm receiving. So I just wanted to get a sense on an everyday practical note. You mentioned, hey, you're in the state, sometimes you're out of the state and you got to climb back up the ladder. I love that visual. In your world, how does it come through for you? How do you know you're there, or you're climbing the ladder?
I focus very much in the courses I teach in my books, and this is also well documented in a number of studies on physical feeling. You know physically, you know in your bones, you feel different. And the reason you feel different is that that cocktail of neurotransmitters, hormones, enzymes, other neurochemicals is very unique. And one of I once shared my method called eco meditation, which I developed in 2009 to make meditation really easy for people. It's a science-based, body-based meditation. You just breathe a certain way, relax certain muscles, and in about 5 minutes, you automatically have triggered your body into this elevated state. And so, one of the people I taught this to had a big company, and he struggled with meditation his whole life. He tried this, and he said, "Wow, I actually got there at, at, for the first time when I did this." He also said that before I did that meditation with you. Before I did eco meditation, I felt as though I was like a person shooting arrows at a target. And I was blindfolded and it was dark. I would occasionally hit the target, but most of my arrows went wild. When I did eco meditation, it was like somebody took off the blindfold, lit up the room, and I could hit the target every time. And he said, once I hit the target a few times in that meditation, I knew what it felt like in my body, and I could go back to that same physical feeling. So it's like, that neurochemical mix is like your tea or your coffee. If you like your coffee with a scoop of sugar and half, then that's what you like. If somebody puts salt in there rather than sugar, you will tell the difference right away. The neurochemical balance is wrong. So when you know the neurochemistry in your body, you know what it's like to hit the target and have that meditative state, you are going to be able to return to it over and over and over and over again really easily. And so it's a physical feeling. And that's the big difference between the mystics of 1,000 years ago and 10,000 years ago, the mystics of today. 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, the world was a very, very different place. It was incredibly violent in a way in which it isn't today. The murder rate in Europe was about 100 times what it is today. So, murder, wars, it was just an incredibly violent environment. And so, the way to find inner peace was to retreat, go live in a convent or a monastery. Then you might get a respite from all of those rigors of the world. Maybe you could pray, maybe you could meditate, maybe you could reach those elevated states, and then you'd go out there and stay out there. And so you see when you read the works of the medieval mystics and works about the medieval mystics, that the focus was very much piety was defined as the ability to escape into a higher state out of the body. And that turned into a lot of I was going to say disregard for the body, but a lot
Mm-hmm.
of body dysmorphia. People really hated the body, and you read the works of these medieval scholars and mystics, and they talk about the body being a collection of pus and shit and urine, and I mean they have this and they would flagellate themselves. They would cut themselves. They had all kinds of practices designed to punish the body. Read about Buddha and his journey for 6 years as a mystic, and he was emaciated. He was starving himself. He was beating himself. He was there were all these attempts to subdue the body, and that again was a facet of the way they did mysticism back then. Today, we're not going to beat up our bodies anymore. We want to have a glorious, wonderful, healthy body, and we want to be in the world. We don't have to retreat behind the walls of a convent or monastery anymore. So now it's a matter of being engaged in the world. We want to actually we want to go to those elevated states still, like the medieval mystics did, but we want to return then to our bodies and have meaningful careers, relationships, parenting, all the things that are part of normal life as well. So that's the process is you move way out there in that meditative space and then you come right back in. So every eco meditation track, and there are hundreds of them out there. I record a bunch of them. Other people are recording them. Millions of people use eco meditation nowadays because it's just so easy to do. And it takes about 5 minutes to get into that elevated state. And you do it automatically too, because it's all science-based, triggering various neurochemical states in your body again, so you can hit the target again and again and again. And so you do that, and then you come back into the body. You feel how that feels in the body. And that good feeling state then tends to perpetuate itself throughout the day. So initially, people feel good inside. But after a while, they start to feel good and they radiate outside as well. So you find these radiant beings. And in Spiritual Intelligence, in the book, chapter 4 is called The Awakened Experience. What does the experience of these mystical states feel like? And there are some large data sets in science that tell us exactly what it's like and how the characteristics. There are 5 characteristics of those transcendent experiences, and so I cover that in the book, what that feels like, and it's something we carry forward then into our body and into everyday life. It's not just reserved for that sort of special time. It is something you're doing all the time after a while, and you know that feeling in your body.
So Jules, my wife, loves your eco meditation. So I'll make sure we have that link in the description of the podcast. It's a lot of fun. Dawson also, you know, you'll love his voice during the meditation. There's a lot of people. It's interesting over the years. I've had it. I'm sure you've had this too. I'll have people come to me and say, "Well, I just can't meditate. I can't shut off my thoughts." And I tried to explain to them that that's part of the process, right? But I want to give you a seat here and just say, hey, to those folks out there that are listening that feel like they can't meditate, what advice would you give them?
A body-based meditation. And in chapter 2 of Spiritual Intelligence, I explain what a body-based meditation is. And so it's hard to meditate using the mind, and it's hard to still the mind using the mind. It's actually pretty much impossible. And that's the way I was taught at 15, to try and still the mind using the mind, to observe your thoughts, Vipassana meditation, other kinds of meditation techniques. And they just didn't work for me, and they work for hardly anybody, because the mind is just very naturally active. The mind just flits around because that's the way evolution designed the brain to be, to scan the environment continuously, looking for threats and opportunities. And so that's just the way our minds and brains operate. And it's hard to make them do anything else with the mind. But when you calm the body, when you dial up activity of the parasympathetic nervous system, for example, then your body is calm, then you understand that there are no threats, and then you are able to do this. So many people have learned to meditate with eco meditation that had never been able to meditate successfully before, and they are able to reach those states, but they're body-based states. And the other thing that happens is they trigger change in the brain. The second chapter of Spiritual Intelligence is called Growing Happiness and Shrinking Suffering. And that's what happens in the brain. In some studies, in some parts of the brain, we find the brain meditating that way using physical techniques, physiological triggers and cues. Parts of the brain, like the emotion regulation part, start to grow, and some components of that emotion regulation circuit grow 10% the first 30 days and another 10%. Now, that emotion regulation tissue in your brain is 20% larger in 2 months. And now you have much better ability to regulate emotion. So that is the power of these physiologically based techniques. And then I'm talking about brain growth, how we can grow the brain. I also talk about brain shrinkage. And brains shrink after the age of 30, 35, 40. Your brain shrinking about 5% per decade. Doesn't sound like a lot, 5% per decade, but it means by the time you're 85, your brain is 25% smaller than it was at 40. So you've lost a lot of brain tissue. If you have Alzheimer's or dementia, then your brain shrinks up to 70%.
Wow.
And I have some staggering images in Spiritual Intelligence, because there's a lot of stories, a lot of images, a lot of diagrams as well. But this is an actual human brain, 65 years old. See it on a mortuary slab. Next to it, there's an Alzheimer's brain. And the Alzheimer's brain is like shrunk down to a tiny little stub inside the skull. It's just startling how much the Alzheimer's brain shrinks. And in the end of the chapter, I I cover the results of remarkable new studies showing that when people use these body-based meditative techniques with Alzheimer's patients, so these are Alzheimer's patients, they have cognitive decline, they have severe brain shrinkage, and they start to use these meditation techniques, their brains start to regrow.
Wow.
So that is the power of these kinds of practices. They aren't just mental, and mental techniques are going to make again hard to use. Use body-based techniques, and it's literally changing the anatomy and functionality of your brain really quickly, and that you know it. You can feel that shift in your body.
That's amazing. I had in that moment in my particular life where I had the transition and I began to embrace, understanding myself. Like you said, when you were younger, you were dealing with massive depression and you started to change. And in my world, I had that big transitional moment, as you know, and I've shared that on the show. But I always call it the before Jeffrey and the after Jeffrey, right? Like you're a whole new person. What can you share a little bit about? I didn't know the before Dawson, but and maybe yours was a slower progression. But do you have a perspective of the before Dawson? The I mean, outside of the depression and those kind of things, other behaviors or things in your life, how things affected you versus how they do now, just to be more practical for folks. Like, hey, this is the real deal is what I'm trying to get across, right?
Your life priorities reorganize themselves dramatically. And things you used to think are important, you no longer mistake for important things. And you know what's important. The perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley defined this in the 1930s, and it goes back to Carl Leibniz before him. But the perennial philosophy is what underlies all the world's great religions. There are three principles that are common to the perennial philosophy. Number one is it posits that under this changing world, the world changes, the seasons change, our bodies change, countries change, the planet changes, atoms change, stars die. Everything is part of this changing world. And the first tenet of the perennial philosophy is that underneath the world of change, there is the changeless. Number two, the second commonality in all religions and philosophies is that an element of that dwells within every human being. And the third of these three tenets of the perennial philosophy is that our purpose in life is to link the two, is to experience ourselves as part of the whole. And in some traditions, it's called non-duality. So again, the division between my little isolated self and the great consciousness of the universe dissolves, and you have the state of oneness. And so that's what your purpose in life is to do that, and nothing else actually matters. That
Mm-hmm.
may seem really extreme to say that, but it's true. How much money you make, your professional status, how much you own, your possessions, all of those things, all your successes, all your failures, everything about your life actually means nothing by comparison to whether or not you reach that third stage of oneness with the all that is. And that's why you're here. In Buddhism and Hinduism, they talk about a wheel of samsara, that there are multiple lifetimes. In fact, even in the New Testament, there are references to multiple lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this concept that we just are on the wheel, we get multiple lifetimes, we do it as long as it takes, as many times as it takes, until we realize that. And you can realize that you can awaken to that. That's what awakening is. That's what enlightenment is. It's not going anywhere or discovering anything. It's finding out what you already inherently are, that you are that consciousness. And so that's the only thing that counts in anybody's life. And so you can look at all these possessions they accumulate, how famous they get, and what they do, and the accolades, and none of it makes any difference when you're on your deathbed, when you're on the other side. All you care about is Did I awaken? How awake was I to who I inherently really am, which is consciousness itself, which is that great consciousness expressing itself through a temporary human mind, body, and heart. And so that's really what we are all here for, and what we all do. And in my own personal life, I know for me that's that first part of the day. I wake up in the morning. I have usually been hanging out in um, an elevated place all night. The first thing I do is I wake up and I'm incredibly full of passion and energy. I
Mm.
want to get out there and meditate as quickly as possible. I've arranged my whole life so I can get from sitting up in bed to meditating in just a few minutes. Uh, Coffee comes first. I
I've
sitting
been
with a mug
there.
of coffee always, and make coffee, brush my teeth, and then I'm there, and it's just this incredible sense of joy, because again, as you're becoming one, as you're resonating with that eternal consciousness. It is just you are expressing the purpose of life. You have found the purpose of life. It doesn't really matter what happens. Good things can happen, bad things can happen. You found life's purpose. You then live having found life's purpose. One of my esteemed scholar friends of mine said, "The journey to God has ended. The journey in God has begun." And it's this
Mhm.
never-ending journey. You're just there every single day in this ecstatic place. And then you learn to translate that into everyday actions and activities. So that's why we're all here. The sooner we wake up and realize that, and just we will find our priorities being reordered. Things we used to like, things we used to be addicted to, patterns of behavior we used to have. You will drop them one after the other. You'll find that a lot of the most precious, the most solid planks of your personality begin to collapse. You are no longer the person you were. And so your priorities are radically reordered. You are passionate about that joy. You want that state of mind of St. Francis, of Rumi, that exuberance, and you feel it flowing through you every day. That's what you crave and want. All the other stuff, it's nice if you have, chocolate ice cream or whatever it is you happen to enjoy. But are you going to go out of your way to make that happen? You'll enjoy it when you get it, but if you don't get it, you won't mind one little bit. So it radically reorders your priorities. Your life becomes incredibly full of joy. Also, we measure increases um, in creativity and productivity. So in spiritual intelligence in chapter 5, I talk about the research into spiritual intelligence in the workplace. And I was really curious. I did a study on my own on this. I said, we know we're getting people in our classes and our workshops through the book into these elevated states of consciousness, but what's happening to them in terms of their material world? Are they then forgetting to change their baby's diaper and pay the bills and send in their tax returns? And
Mhm.
are they still okay in terms of their functioning in the real world? And so I did a study to explore that, and we measured productivity before and after hitting transcendent states, and we found that productivity went up 20% in a
Mhm.
month. The
Wow.
first month you do this, you start to gain an extra day a week in terms of productivity. Your
Wow.
brain is functioning more efficiently. We measure this in terms of brain function. We see that your brain is like running like a fine-tuned engine, runs beautifully efficiently. You see opportunities. You're much more creative than before. And then other studies, bigger studies, for example, of banks. They looked at banks where the managers were trained in spiritual intelligence, and those banks had better financial results than
Wow.
banks where the managers didn't have that training. Another piece of research looked at big industrial organizations and found those that had managers with spiritual intelligence, they had much better financial results, employee retention, job satisfaction, all kinds of metrics. So
Yeah.
things just get way, way, way better on the outside. Do they get perfect? No. Life still has its ups and downs. But again, you're in the flow at that point, and you aren't bumping into all these things. So your life changes, your priorities reorder, your life becomes a lot easier than it otherwise would be. In terms of metaphysics, people's levels of intuition go way up. Their levels of synchronicity that they experience, meaningful coincidences, go way up. Clairvoyance, clairsentience, all these intuitive powers seem to spike in these states. And so you're really functioning in this flow state in a whole different way in the world, and it shows up all around you in what's going on. So it's powerful to be in that place, and that's what you're likely to find. I found is a radical reordering of those priorities. You know what's important. You know why you're here on earth. Your life has meaning and purpose, and you are passionate about living that meaning and purpose every day.
Amazing, amazing. You always kind of put the things that run simply in my mind about, I shared my life philosophy with you before, but it's you're kind of wrapping the science around all of it, right? It's a journey, and I always say we're learning on this earth how to learn how to love ourselves as God loves us, or as creation loves us, and that journey, that perfectness is why I'm writing the book The Perfect Soul. Is that perfectness is already there. It's our journey of kind of shedding all the things, the addictions and all those things that don't align with what we'll call your true nature, right? And that's the journey, and that journey never ends. But as you begin to love yourself more, and this is in the Bible, this is in the New Testament, you begin to love others. You begin to see the true perfectness in others. Julie always says she sees the inner child in others, but you see the perfectness in others, that God's intention for them, even though their behaviors may not be something you currently want to be involved in. You begin to see the perfect nature in others and love them as Jesus told his followers. Love them as yourself. I always say, love them, see them as God sees them, and their perfectness. And as you begin to do that, like you said, less things show up in your life, more synchronicities, less strife, less struggle, better finances, all those fun things. So I know we only have time for maybe one more question, but I want to kind of gear into I want to get your perspective on the whole concept of this show, which is, it's unlocking the miracles within. So one of my beliefs is that as we go through this journey and we're shedding something, we're actually unlocking a miracle that the divine planted within us from the beginning, because the divine is timeless. It's oneless. It's not how we see things. We like putting things in levels and layers, and this happened before this happened before this, steps. And I know your beautiful research mind has thought through all these steps and researched, but I wanted to get your perspective on that concept of miracles. And I know you've witnessed miracles in your life, and as it relates to, anyway, I just want to hear your perspective on, doing that unlocking, because my belief is you unlock them in yourself, you unlock them in others just by being in their field.
Miracles are a delight, and there are many different dimensions to them, and I think I'll just pick two. One of those, I see this in my live workshops. Like I'm doing a workshop soon at Omega Institute, and we'll just create a healing crucible for a weekend. People will come in there with various physical and mental issues, and they'll step into the healing crucible. And what I have seen happen now for decades in these events is that people heal in miraculous ways. One woman, for example, sticks in my mind. I worked with her at a live event, and she had a frozen shoulder. She had a frozen shoulder for about 17 years. She had very limited range of motion, so she showed us how her one arm could move all over the place, her other arm could barely move much at all. And again, 17 years frozen shoulder. I asked her when it happened. She said she used to work in an office 17 years ago where there was a filing cabinet behind her. And when she was reaching back into that filing cabinet day after day after day, month after month, she injured herself and her shoulder had been frozen ever since. And none of the healing treatments she had tried had made it any better. So it was so interesting to have this case there of somebody who had a physiological problem with a physiological cause that hadn't shifted. And so I was doing EFT tapping with her, tapping on acupressure points. And we talked about that. We talked about other things going on in her life 17 years before. And it turned out there had been a lot of trauma in that year. And so we tapped and we released some of the emotional charge around that trauma. And then I said to her, and by the way, just go ahead and raise your arm again. And so she raised her good arm, she raised her bad arm, and her bad arm had regained full range of motion.
Mm.
And it was so funny because it was being videoed, and the video recording shows her staring at her arm with this absolute amazement. She's staring at her arm, clearly completely stunned into disbelief, but there she's seeing her arm at that level. So we see these healing, seeming miracles. Now, what happened there? It was energy shift that did it, because that tapping on acupuncture meridians is reordering her energy system. She's shifting her story as she does that. She's telling her story, but introducing this energy component. Also, there's an open field of consciousness here. She tells me her story. I empathize with her story. Definitely, I of compassion with her on her plight. And do I believe in the limitation? Not at all. I have an open mind to anything happening. Now, I don't know that things are happening. There's no guarantee that everyone's going to heal, but I've seen this happen in so many hundreds of cases that I know healing miracles are possible. So that's one component of that. And the bigger piece of seeing these healing miracles is that open space in consciousness is when you align yourself with the field of all possibilities, then things start to shift and change. And in at the end of my book, Spiritual Intelligence, I have one graph that is just stunning. And that is a graph of meditators, a group of meditators, what their heart rate variability looked like for 30 days. And you see these patterns where it's high some days, lower other days. Kind of looks like looking at a mountain range and all the peaks and valleys of the 30-day graph of these human beings who are in heart coherence. And then I have that overlaid on a second graph, and the second graph is cosmic activity. This shows up in the form of solar flares and coronal mass ejections. So the sun has activity, and we measure that scientifically. We can see the the peaks and valleys. It changes every day, changes every moment. There are periods when there's a lot of solar activity, periods of lower solar activity, and then in this image in spiritual intelligence, I overlay the two graphs, individual heart coherence and solar activity, which is being driven by things elsewhere in the galaxy, elsewhere in the cosmos. And the two sets of peaks and valleys match. So this person now is not only coherent with everyone else in that group, but is also coherent with these enormous cosmic cycles. And that's what starts to happen. That's when miracles can occur, because we are no longer bound by our own individual sense of limitation. We're open to the cosmos and we're able to flow with the cosmos. And so now we're open to the field of infinite possibilities there is in the cosmos, including that of healing. So miracles are accessible, are available. I see them, we open ourselves to them, we do certain things that predispose us to them, and we also are unattached to the outcome. We're not all invested in me healing. Like I would prefer that people heal. I liked seeing that woman's arm unfreeze, but if it hadn't unfrozen, we at least would have done some emotional healing and accepted that. So you aren't dependent on an outcome. And I think this is a critical point because I see people, for example, I've seen one particular group of friends who were praying and doing energy work on one of our friends who had cancer. And everything was focused on his levels of cancer markers. And they had a support group for him for about 3 years. And
Mhm.
the metric as they would meet every week was how high and low are his markers? Are they going up? Or are they going down? If they were going up, everyone was like, "Oh, we need to put more energy in." If they were going down, everyone's like, "Oh, this is great." And I actually left the group because I didn't feel comfortable with that investment in the outcomes. and this emotional attachment to whether the markets were going up and the markets were going down. So you have these intentions, you intend the highest good for yourself and everyone, and then you surrender and let it go. It's in the hands of the universe, and sometimes that person's going to die. And in fact, that particular person did die in that third year, despite all the efforts of the magic group to miracle his
Yeah.
body back out of cancer. And healing stories too in my books of people with cancer that were surrendered and then they did heal. So it's not the cancer markers or the cancer progress that's important. It's the inner state, it's that acceptance, it's that love. And you'll find people who do eventually die of cancer, but they die so full of love, totally emotionally resolved. And that's what matters. So there is room for miracles. Science shows there is such a remarkable correlation between our consciousness and what happens around us. We can literally, there's evidence in my book showing that we literally are affecting molecules in the world around our bodies. We literally can change molecules around us. Our minds and our consciousness is so powerful. And we're open to whatever the universe holds. Eventually, our bodies are likely to get old and die. And so, even if we have a perfect life full of miracles, eventually you're going to take your last breath, and that'll be it for your body and mind. At that point, hopefully, you have learned to live in consciousness, and your consciousness then will merge with that great consciousness. And that's the greatest miracle of all, is that while we're alive, while we're here, we as individuals can relax, release, and surrender our individual human consciousness into all of consciousness. And when you do, again, you have access to those levels of being, and that is the greatest miracle of all.
Yeah, I just have two little, you always trigger these as you're talking, all these things come up in me. There's just two little, short little stories I'll share for the audience here. And then Dawson, I'll let you wrap it up. And what I'd like you to do is just, hey, what's the next step? Like, I'm sure they're excited about learning anything. What would you suggest is the next step with you? But the two little stories are, the first one is you talk about this. We just not aware of how amazing we're just kind of connected to everything, how our molecules, and I was reading some research, and I have not vetted this research, so, but it might be something you might want to go look at and vet because you're that kind of guy, that our house plants, our plants in our home, know they change, they shift their frequency when we are the homeowner within 2 kilometers of the home. Like
Wow.
they're and that's how big the field is where they're. And now you don't have to get into, okay, is it good, is it bad, what, just the thought that the frequency shifts in a measurable way when we're in the field. And there's also why we sing to plants or talk to plants or talk to trees, but that's happening all the time, every time, everywhere you are, not just with people but with all things that are around you, which I think is just beautifully God. The second little thing that you triggered, I was actually watching a show, and there was a prayer that the Jewish people did back in Jesus' time, where they did exactly what you're talking about. They would tell the stories, the Jewish stories, like if God did not part the seas, I think it's called a day on you or something like that. But there's a term for it that, don't quote me on this, but it would really touch my heart. If God did not part the seas, and we were captured by the Egyptians, it's still perfect, right? Basically, it's just the way it's supposed to be. It's the way God, intended it, and they're just giving it every step of all these critical things in the journey of the Jewish people. They're giving it to God, and then there's a scene where the women of Jesus were giving their experience with Jesus, given their personal experience with Jesus. If you didn't raise Lazarus from the dead, it's still perfect the way it is. This every step or every experience they had with Jesus, which was profoundly impacted their life. And it really touched my heart because it's exactly what you're saying. Yes, of course you want the person with cancer to heal. But in reality, you're being prayer works, you're being there, your energy there works with them. If it's part of the infinite design, and you have to be okay letting that go and putting the best energy out there and letting it become whatever it's supposed to become. And that's part of our free will. It's part of the the glorious design. That's how I look at it. And I think one of the things I want to incorporate into my life now is that, okay, if this is meant to be, let it be. But I'm going to give my love and my presence and my appreciation for that moment. And like you said, what's better than dialing with that infinite love and that peace and that expression? You know, would you have it any other way? And probably the answer probably is no. So anyway, thank you so much for today for the show. I'm sure, as always, you're gonna touch people's hearts and open their eyes, and hopefully they rush and you pick up one of your books, because I think their eyes will be opened even more. Of course, mine has been, and just being connected with you and your beautiful family has been amazing. Christine is an amazing wife of yours and person. So, what would you suggest that maybe just one or two next steps for them to step into this world of meditation or connect with you more deeply?
At the end of each chapter of my new book, Spiritual Intelligence, I have a section called Extended Play Resources and Deepening Practices. And I give you links there to free online meditations. And so you go there, and so every chapter ends with how you can deepen this in your own life. And so go there, go to those ends of each chapter sections, and use those meditations. They're incredibly powerful. In one randomized controlled trial, we showed that people doing this had measurable changes in their brains in 30 days. We can actually pick up on an MRI changes in their brains in a month, significant changes. So use the extended play resources at the end of each chapter of Spiritual Intelligence. To get the book itself, you go to spiritualintelligencebook.com, spiritualintelligencebook.com. You also will get the downloadable two free chapters, and you will get a meditation there, as well as a video on those four parts of the brain and how you can cultivate the development of those four circuits in your own brain. And then as you are looking through my website, as you are looking at what you need for your own healing, go for it. I so recommend people do what it takes. Take an online course, hire a practitioner to work with you. We have over 500 certified clinical EFT practitioners. They're available to work with you. They can help you integrate this. They can help you with your journey, both of trauma healing and also of reaching transcendent states. So find those resources, take the online courses, take the live courses, do what it takes to shift your life. Don't wait until you're retired. Don't wait till some future time. Do that now. I don't have a lot of regrets about my own life, but some of the things I do, looking back, I would have done differently. Is if I knew then what I know now, I would have prioritized this when I was 20, 25,
Mm.
and I didn't. I was caught up in making money, making a living, relationships, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, all those things. And you realize after a few decades that those things are just part of that changing world. They aren't part of the changeless. So wherever you are in your life, go for it now. Also, remember those studies in chapter 2 of Spiritual Intelligence on brain health. Those markers for cognitive decline and dementia show up in blood tests in 30-year-olds. We can tell from a blood test when you're 30 if you are at risk for this, and half of people, all people are. And you can start to change that at the age of 30. So what I recommend you do is start the meditation practice, start the simple practice, download the meditation, and start doing that daily now, like tomorrow, immediately. Because at Spiritual Intelligence book, you can get the meditation right away. I mean, like in the next 5 minutes. So do that. Do it without stopping for 30 days. For 30 mornings, for about 15 minutes every morning, won't take you long, do the meditation, because that's what it takes to start to produce changes in the brain. At that point, you're going to become so hooked on feeling good. Your body's going to be enjoying all those neurotransmitters and hormones. You're unlikely to stop. You'll make that meditation practice a lifelong practice after you've done it for 30 days. That's what our research shows. People hardly ever stop because they're used to feeling so good in their body. So the concrete thing you can do is go to spiritualintelligencebook.com, grab a copy of the book, audio, Kindle, um, hard copy. I recommend the hard copy just because it has a lot of images in it. There are a lot of stories, a lot of photographs, a lot of drawings, and you can't get those easily in the audio version. So the hard copy is really the thing to get. And so grab the book and then apply that, use those deepening practices. And again, just do them for 30 days. That alone is likely to shift the entire trajectory of your brain development, and then you're out of life.
Awesome. Well, bless you, my friend. And thanks for sharing your smile. I didn't get quite a good laugh out of you. He has an amazing laugh. So,
We've had a few.
yeah, I got a few of them. But yeah, no, always, this is gold. So, I will have all the links that Dawson talked about in the description on the podcast and on YouTube. So, just go there and click it. And thank you so much, Dawson. Amazing.
Every
Thank
blessing.
you.
It's been wonderful to share with you as always, Jeffrey. Thank
All right,
you.
thanks. All right, shut up.